the sound of winter in Moscow is different. When the wind hits the crimson walls of the Kremlin, it carries the whispers of sins committed centuries ago. History books remember him as a monster. The Western world called him the Terrible. But that word tells only half of his story. In Russian, his name was Ivan Grozny. This word implies not just fear, but an awe-inspiring power, an unstoppable force of nature, like a thunderstorm. He was the founder of modern Russia. He was the architect who united scattered princedoms with an iron fist and turned them into an empire. But at the same time, he was a paranoid man who destroyed his own people, his own city, and even his own blood. His mind was a battlefield where personal traumas clashed with the birth pangs of an empire. How could a man be so devout that he prayed for hours, yet spend his time in torture chambers as if practicing an art form? This is not merely the story of a madman on a throne. This is the tragic saga of how absolute power eats away at a human soul, how betrayal turns a child into a tyrant, and how a father strangled his own legacy with his own hands. Our story begins not with ominous signs in the sky before he was born, but with the tears of a lonely child in the cold, stone corridors of the Moscow palace. The year is 1533, when the Grand Prince of Moscow, Vasily III, died. He left behind a massive territory and an heir who was only 3 years old, Ivan. The death of his father was the first crack in the little boy's life, but the real disaster was yet to come. His mother, Alana Glinskaya, took power as regent. She was a strong, intelligent woman, ruthless against her enemies. But in Russia at that time, power was monopolized by powerful noble families called Boyars. These families, especially the Shuisky and Belsky clans, believed they were the true owners of the throne. When Ivan was just 8 years old, his mother died suddenly. Records of the time and modern forensic analysis show high levels of poison in Elena's body. Even at that age, Ivan could sense this truth. With his mother gone, the palace turned into a pit of vipers. It was during this period that the seeds were sown that would shape Ivan's character and make him the Terrible. Officially, he was a ruler. When foreign ambassadors arrived, he was placed on his throne, dressed in fancy robes, and treated like an emperor. But once the ceremony was over and the doors were closed, he was just an unwanted child. The Boyars looted the state treasury right before Ivan's eyes. They got drunk and fought in the palace. Ivan and his deaf, mute brother Yuri were often left starving and dressed in old rags. Decades later, Ivan would write letters, recalling those days with hatred. He never forgot how Prince Shuisky lay on his father's bed with his muddy boots on and insulted him. This humiliation lit a deep fire of revenge inside him. The feeling of powerlessness made him obsessed with power. Young Ivan found an escape from this traumatic environment in violence. It is said that he threw cats and dogs down from the high towers of the Kremlin to watch them die. This was a sign of future violence, what psychologists today would call a conduct disorder. But Ivan was not just a sadist. He was also incredibly intelligent and curious. He would lock himself in libraries, reading Roman history, religious texts, and the lives of great emperors. He saw himself as a victim chosen by God, but surrounded by sinful servants. At the age of 13, he made his first bloody move. He ordered the arrest of the Boyar leader Andrei Shuisky, who had tormented him the most, and had him torn apart by dogs. This sent a cold shiver through everyone in the palace. That quiet, neglected boy had finally shown his teeth. By 1547, 16-year-old Ivan did something no one in Russian history had dared to do before. He crowned himself not just as Grand Prince, but as Tsar. This word came from Caesar the title of Roman emperors. Ivan saw Moscow as the Third Rome and claimed to be the spiritual and political heir of Byzantium. This coronation was the declaration of Russia's transition from a state to an empire. That same year, he married Anastasia Romanovna, the greatest chance of his life and perhaps his only true love. Anastasia was the only harbor that could calm the storms in Ivan's soul. She was gentle, pious, and compassionate. Historians agree that as long as Anastasia was alive, Ivan remained the good Tsar. This period was Ivan's golden age. The young Tsar gathered talented advisors around him and embarked on major reforms. He established the first assembly called the Zemsky Sobor, updated the laws, and created a professional army equipped with firearms called the Streltsy. But his eyes were on the east, the Khanate of Kazan, a Tatar kingdom that had been raiding Russian lands and burning villages for centuries. In 1552, Ivan stood at the gates of Kazan with a massive army. This was not just a territorial war, it was a crusade. The Russian army besieged the city, digging tunnels under the walls and detonating gunpowder barrels. When Kazan fell, Ivan returned to Moscow as a victorious commander. The colorful fairy tale, like St. Basil's Cathedral, which is the symbol of Red Square today, was built to commemorate this victory. Ivan was now the hero of his people, the sword of God on earth. With the conquest of Astrakhan, he reached the Caspian Sea and opened the gates to Siberia. Everything seemed perfect, but fate had already begun to weave its web of tragedy. In 1553, Ivan fell deadly ill. Burning with fever, he summoned the Boyars to his bedside and asked them to swear allegiance to his infant son. But the Boyars hesitated. They thought Ivan was going to die and had already started fighting for power among themselves. In his semi-conscious state, Ivan heard the whispers and betrayal plans of even those he considered his closest advisors. When he miraculously recovered, he was no longer the same. Trust had been replaced by suspicion. But the final straw came in the year 1560. His beloved wife Anastasia fell ill and died shortly after. Ivan was devastated. At the funeral, the powerful Tsar struggled to stand as he walked behind the coffin, howling in pain. Ivan never believed that his wife died a natural death. He was certain the Boyars had poisoned her. And modern science proved him right centuries later. When Anastasia's remains were examined in the 20th century, abnormally high levels of mercury and arsenic were found in her hair. Anastasia was Ivan's last link to humanity. When that link snapped, only the terrible remained. After Anastasia's death, Ivan's behavior changed radically. An atmosphere of terror began to blow through the palace. He exiled or executed his old advisors, but Ivan was a clever manipulator. In the winter of 1564, he suddenly left Moscow. He took his family, his treasury, and his icons and retreated to the town of Alexandrov. He sent 2 letters to Moscow. In the first, he accused the Boyars and the church of treason. In the second, he told the people, "I have no grievance with you." This was a brilliant political move. Left without a head, the public panicked. Fearing the people's anger, the Boyars went to Alexandrov and begged Ivan, "Come back and rule us." Ivan agreed to return, but on one condition: he wanted absolute, unquestionable power, and he would establish his own private organization to punish traitors. Thus began the era of the Oprichnina. This was the first state terror scene in Russian history. Ivan divided the country in 2. While one part was ruled by normal laws, the other part, which he named the Oprichnina, was his sole property. He established a private army of 6,000 men called the Oprichniki. These men, dressed in black and riding black horses, carried two symbolic objects on their saddles, a dog's head and a broom. This symbolized that they would first bite the Tsar's enemies, then sweep them away. The oprichniki were above the law. They could raid any nobleman's house they wanted, seize their property, torture, and kill them. Russia turned into a bloodbath. Ivan eradicated the old boyar families who had humiliated him in his childhood. But the violence was not limited to the nobility. As his paranoia grew, he began to see entire cities as enemies. In 1570, he heard a baseless rumor that the wealthy trading city of Novgorod was collaborating with Lithuania. He marched on the city with his oprichniki army. What happened next is one of the darkest pages of history. A massacre took place in Novgorod that lasted for weeks. People were thrown into the freezing Volkhov River. Those trying to get out were pushed back with spears. Priests, merchants, women, and children. Historians state the death toll in the thousands. The river was so full of bodies that the flow of the water changed. Ivan believed this was God's wrath. After every execution, he would go to church and pray for hours, banging his forehead on the floor until it bled. This dilemma was the most terrifying aspect of his state of mind. He saw himself as both a chief sinner and a chief judge. Ivan's physical health was also deteriorating. Calcification in his spine caused him unbearable pain. The mercury ointments used as painkillers at the time were slowly poisoning him, increasing his mental instability and fits of rage. No one was safe in the palace anymore. He would not put a single bite in his mouth without food tasters, and he subjected even his closest friends to terrible torture at the slightest suspicion. However, the greatest tragedy of Ivan's life was not political, but familial. By 1581, Ivan's eldest son and heir, Ivan Ivanovich, frequently clashed with his father. The young Ivan was a talented, strong prince like his father, and a candidate to rule the country. One November day, Tsar Ivan entered the room of his daughter-in-law, Yelena. He attacked and began beating the pregnant woman because he found her outfit inappropriate. Hearing the screams, his son Ivan Ivanovich ran into the room. "You beat my wife, now will you kill my child?" he shouted at his father. Blinded by rage, Ivan the Terrible raised the heavy, iron-tipped staff in his hand and brought it down with all his might on his son's head. The young prince fell to the ground. Blood was leaking from his temple. In that moment, Ivan's anger suddenly extinguished, replaced by a terrifying regret. He collapsed over his son, pressing on the wound to stop the blood. "May I be damned! I've killed my son! I've killed my son!" he wailed. Palace doctors were summoned, but it was in vain. After lingering in a coma for a few days, the heir died in his father's arms. This moment is immortalized in the famous painting by Ilya Repin, an old man with eyes wide with horror and madness, holding his bloody son in his lap. With that blow, Ivan had killed not only his son, but also the dynasty he had founded. Because the remaining son, Fyodor, was mentally disabled and incapable of ruling the country. Ivan had destroyed his own future. After his son's death, Ivan turned into a living dead man. He wandered the palace corridors like a ghost at night, muttering his son's name. To soothe his conscience, he made massive donations to monasteries. He had long lists prepared containing the names of his victims, the Book of the Dead, and asked the monks to pray for their souls. There were more than 3,000 names on these lists. This was the bizarre repentance of a killer. In March 1584, Ivan felt death approaching. He summoned soothsayers and witches to look at the stars. According to historians, his death came during a chess game. The uncertainty of who would leave the throne after his son was the harbinger of the time of troubles awaiting Russia. When he took his last breath, he left behind a palace trembling with fear, a massive empire with expanded borders, and a history written in blood. So, was Ivan really terrible, or was he a necessary leader created by a brutal age? His legacy is complex. He united Russia, laid the foundations of the modern state, introduced the printing press, and developed trade. But in doing so, he engraved the idea of the sanctity of the state and the nothingness of the individual into the Russian mind. The system of absolute authority he established became Russia's form of government for centuries. Today, when you go to the Kremlin, you can feel that his ghost is still there. He was an orphan child, a reformist youth, a loving husband, and finally, a deranged killer. His story teaches us a chilling lesson about the nature of powers. Unchecked power destroys not only enemies, but also its owner. Ivan made Russia a great state, but he sacrificed his soul for it. History continues to judge him, but he had already served his sentence while he was alive, the moment he brought that bloody staff down on his son's head. As the winter winds continue to blow over Moscow, the legend of Ivan the Terrible will continue to echo within the storm.